Imagine if simply playing a specific pulsing track of pink noise while you slept could literally hardwire your brain to remember exactly where you left your keys the day before.
Right. It sounds completely made up.
It sounds like pure science fiction, but it is actually a highly specific biological intervention. And if you're listening to this deep dive right now, well, that is exactly the kind of leverage you're looking for. I mean,
Mm.
you want to build a highly functional, deeply resilient body, but let's be honest, you do not have the time to sit down and synthesize thousands of pages of molecular biology or, metabolic research and clinical trials to figure out how to actually do it.
Which is entirely fair. I mean, the volume of peer-reviewed data on human longevity right now is just, it's staggering.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Exactly. And the problem is that most of it is presented in absolute silos. So you have a paper on mitochondrial function over here, and then, a study on bone turnover markers over there. And very rarely does anyone actually connect the dots to show how these systems communicate with one another.
And that is exactly our mission today. We are taking a deep dive into the comprehensive guide to biological longevity and resilience. We are going to extract the most actionable, scientifically rigorous protocols to upgrade your physical architecture.
Right.
We're treating the human body exactly like what it is, an interconnected ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to start down at the microscopic level, right? Your cells and your gut microbiome. From there, we'll move up to the nervous system, reinforce your structural scaffolding with bone metabolism and hormones, lock in those repairs with advanced sleep architecture, and finally build some raw systemic horsepower with your aerobic capacity.
It's a full rebuild.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the foundation.
Well, the foundation requires acknowledging a very simple biological reality. You just cannot optimize a system that is actively dealing with a chronic toxic burden.
Right.
Before we can even talk about high-performance outputs, we have to stop the constant low-grade inflammatory assault on the gut lining. And we have to literally clear out the cellular garbage.
Which brings us to the Autoimmune Protocol, or AIP, which was originally modified by nutritional therapy practitioner Mickey Trescott. And just to be clear, this isn't about calorie restriction at all, right?
No, not at all.
It's a highly targeted elimination protocol. So for 30 to 90 days, you completely remove known inflammatory triggers. So gluten, dairy, nightshade vegetables, eggs. But you maintain your caloric intake with hypoallergenic complex carbohydrates.
Like certain legumes and rice.
Exactly. And then you slowly reintroduce those potential triggers.
Right, and we really need to look at the mechanism of why this works. When you consume a food compound that your specific immune system tags as a foreign invader, it triggers an inflammatory cascade in the mucosal lining of your gut.
A constant alarm bell.
Yes, and over time, that constant immune response degrades the intestinal barrier. So by completely removing those antigenic triggers for a set period, you're mechanically turning down the volume on systemic inflammation.
You're just removing the static.
Exactly. You are essentially removing the chemical static, which gives the gut microbiome the operational bandwidth it actually needs to repopulate, diversify, and repair the epithelial tissue.
And the clinical data backing this up is incredible. There is a pilot study conducted at Scripps Gastroenterology looking at patients diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease.
IBD.
Yeah. These are people with severe chronic gut dysregulation. They placed them on this AIP intervention, and by week 6, a staggering 73% of those patients achieved clinical remission.
It's amazing. It really highlights how rapidly the body wants to heal itself once that constant influx of inflammatory triggers is just removed.
There is a particularly vivid case study in the text regarding a patient with severe ulcerative colitis. His intestinal degradation was so advanced that his gastroenterologist had him scheduled for a major bowel resection surgery, literally cutting out a section of his colon.
Wow.
Yeah, and he asked for just 1 month to try the AIP diet as a last-ditch effort.
Yeah.
30 days later, his follow-up colonoscopy showed 0 active inflammation. 0. No ulcerations whatsoever. He completely circumvented an invasive, life-altering surgical procedure simply by manipulating his biological inputs for a month.
It's a profound demonstration of systemic recovery.
Right.
But, stopping the influx of damage is really only half the equation.
Right.
Once you've halted that inflammatory cascade, you have to actively clear out the damaged cellular machinery that accumulated while you were inflamed.
The cellular cleanup crew.
Yes.
This is where we get into a compound called Urolithin A. Functionally, it acts like a localized recycling plant inside your cells. But I want to push back on this for a second.
Yeah.
Because the prevailing narrative is that you just need to eat more antioxidant-rich foods, right? If urolithin A is derived from pomegranates, why shouldn't I just drink a massive glass of pomegranate juice every morning? Why do we need a specific, isolated protocol for this?
That's a great question. It's because human biology is wildly heterogeneous, especially in the gut. The actual pomegranate fruit does not contain urolithin A.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it contains precursors called elagitannins. For those precursors to be metabolized into urolithin A, your gut microbiome must possess a very specific strain of bacteria.
Oh, I see.
And the reality is, only 30 to 40% of the human population actually has the required microbiome profile to make that conversion.
So for most beef.
For the other 60%, drinking pomegranate juice yields zero urolithin A. To achieve the clinical therapeutic threshold, you need to supplement it directly specifically. 500 milligrams to 1 gram daily, maintained over a 2 to 4 month window.
Which just bypasses the microbiome lottery entirely.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how urolithin A triggers a highly conserved biological process known as mitophagy.
Mitophagy.
Right. According to cell biologist Chris Rinch, mitophagy is the mechanism your cells use to identify mitochondria that have lost their membrane potential. You know, the ones that are damaged and leaking oxidative free radicals, and literally engulf them.
Like Pac-Man.
Yeah, exactly like that. The cell breaks down that old dysfunctional mitochondria and uses the raw materials to synthesize fresh, highly efficient ones.
So it isn't just about neutralizing bad mitochondria, it is an active engine replacement at the microscopic level.
Precisely. And we can actually measure the systemic impact of that mitochondrial turnover. A trial published in Nature Aging took individuals between 50 and 70 years old and administered just 1 gram of urolithin A daily for a month.
Okay.
The researchers observed a massive upregulation in the proliferation of naive CD8 cells and natural killer immune cells. So by fixing the energy production inside the cell, they effectively rejuvenated the broader immune system.
Not to mention the longevity markers. I mean, in preclinical models using worms, urolithin A extended total lifespan by 45%.
Which is huge.
It's massive. To put that in perspective, a 45% lifespan extension is the kind of result researchers normally only see with severe punishing caloric restriction. But here, they achieved it just by optimizing mitochondrial recycling. Oh, and a fascinating side note for anyone who cares about skin health alongside their internal biology. An 8-week trial utilizing a topical application of urolithin A demonstrated a statistically significant reduction in fine lines and wrinkles.
Wow.
It is literal proof that when you restore mitochondrial efficiency, it reflects visibly on the outside of the body.
It really is the ultimate biological cleanup protocol.
Whoa.
But this brings us to a crucial pivot point. You've repaired the gut lining. You've cleared out the degraded mitochondria. You now have a population of fresh, highly efficient cells.
Right.
But if your autonomic nervous system is dysregulated, you will immediately flood those fresh cells with cortisol and oxidative stress, starting the degradation cycle all over again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which means we have to move up from the microscopic level and take control of the command center. We have to regulate the nervous system because the autonomic nervous system isn't just something that happens to you, right? You can actually grab the steering wheel. The protocol we are looking at comes from Sachin Patel, and it is built around the physiologic sigh.
Yes. It is an incredibly potent mechanical intervention.
How does it work?
The protocol is straightforward. Whenever you register an acute spike in stress or sympathetic arousal, you execute 2 sharp consecutive inhales through the nose, followed by a long, controlled exhale through the mouth.
Okay.
You repeat this 3 to 5 times. Then you lock that state in with coherent breathing, which is a 4-second nasal inhale, followed by a 6-second exhale.
The mechanics of those 2 sharp inhales are what really interests me. It's not just taking a deep breath.
No, not at all.
That second sharp intake of air mechanically pops open the alveoli in your lungs that have collapsed under stress. It maximizes the surface area for oxygen exchange. And then that long exhale acts like a physical emergency brake.
And that emergency brake is the vagus nerve. By consciously extending the exhalation phase of your breath, you stimulate the vagal tone, which actively forces your nervous system to shunt out of sympathetic dominance, your fight or flight mode, and down-regulates you into the parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest.
Makes total sense.
Furthermore, Patel highlights how this alters blood chemistry through the Bohr effect. When you are chronically stressed, you hyperventilate slightly, blowing off way too much carbon dioxide.
Which most people think is a good thing. I mean, we are taught that CO2 is just a waste gas.
Right, but that's a massive physiological misunderstanding. Carbon dioxide is the key that unlocks oxygen from your hemoglobin.
Mm.
If your CO2 tolerance is too low, the oxygen stays locked in your blood and never actually offloads into your brain or your cellular tissues.
The case study on this blew my mind. There was a woman at one of Patel's clinical seminars who was suffering from chronic, debilitating panic attacks.
Yeah.
She took a body oxygen level test, or a BOLT score, to measure her baseline CO2 tolerance. Her score was under 20 seconds.
Which is remarkably low.
Her blood chemistry was so heavily skewed by chronic hyperventilation that the mere physiological act of holding her breath for a few seconds caused enough CO2 accumulation to instantly trigger a full-blown panic attack.
Wow.
But once they identified that mechanical failure, she was able to use nasal breathing protocols to rebuild her CO2 tolerance. She literally turned off the chronic cortisol alarm system that was driving her accelerated aging.
It is a perfect example of using conscious breathing to override unconscious stress loops. But, breath work is an acute intervention.
Okay.
We also have to address the chronic architecture of stress, which brings us to a concept called ikigai,
Right.
the cultivation of a profound daily sense of purpose.
Now, I am absolutely going to push back on this one.
Go for it.
We're talking about naive CD8 cells, mitochondrial degradation, and the Bohr effect. We are deep in the hard biological sciences. Suddenly pivoting to finding your life's purpose feels incredibly soft. Isn't ikigai a little too philosophical to be considered a hard longevity protocol?
It sounds like a philosophical abstraction until you look at the endocrine and genetic data.
Right.
Yeah. A highly defined sense of daily purpose acts as a psychological anchor that prevents the autonomic nervous system from drifting into chronic, low-grade sympathetic arousal. When you lack purpose, the brain perceives a lack of environmental control, which elevates your baseline stress hormones.
Uh-huh.
Those hormones, over time, physically erode your telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of your DNA strands. So having a concrete reason to get out of bed actually prevents your DNA from prematurely fraying.
Oh, wow. It is literally psychological scaffolding protecting biological hardware.
Exactly. And Dan Buettner's extensive research in the blue zones provides the epidemiological proof for this. Across multiple distinct cultures, individuals who possess a clearly articulated sense of purpose exhibit a 15 to 20% lower mortality rate compared to those who do not.
That's huge.
And this biological protection becomes exponentially more vital as we age.
The contrast drawn in the text between an Okinawan farmer and the standard Western retirement model perfectly illustrates this. I mean, in Okinawa, you have an elder who has tended a specific garden and held a specific societal role for 60 years.
Right.
They don't hit age 65 and suddenly sever all ties to their daily utility. Their ikigai remains completely intact.
Yes.
Conversely, in the West, we have this model where you work intensely and then abruptly stop. You lose your daily structure, your social utility vanishes, and your sense of identity crumbles.
It's true.
And the physiological fallout is brutal. The text notes that when that purpose evaporates, physical activity drops, metabolic markers plummet, and measurable cognitive decline frequently sets in within just 2 to 3 years.
Purpose is not a luxury. It is a biological imperative for systemic resilience.
Okay, so we've used breathwork and purpose to shield our DNA from the corrosive effects of stress. But we still have to contend with the physical reality of aging. The structural scaffolding of our bodies, our bones, and the chemical messengers that maintain them will inevitably degrade unless we actively intervene.
This is a critical transition.
Yeah.
Because most people treat bone health as entirely static. They assume their skeletal structure is totally fine until the day it suddenly fractures.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The traditional method for tracking bone density is the DEXA scan. But relying on a DEXA scan is like taking a single photograph of a skyscraper once every 2 years to see if the foundation is sinking.
That's a great analogy.
By the time you notice a lean, the structural damage is already severe, but there's a different way. Dr. Doug Lucas, an orthopedic surgeon, utilizes specific blood markers, CTX, which measures bone breakdown, and P1NP, which measures new bone formation.
Right.
Tracking these markers is like mounting a 247 surveillance camera on that skyscraper and watching the construction and demolition crews working in real time.
Exactly. It shifts bone health from a reactive guess to a proactive, measurable science. You can implement a nutritional or load-bearing intervention and know within weeks by looking at your P1NP and CTX markers if you are actively shifting the balance toward bone formation rather than waiting 3 years for a DEXA scan to tell you that you've developed osteopenia.
Right.
And when we look at the primary regulatory driver of those bone-building osteoblast cells, particularly for women, We absolutely have to look directly at hormones.
The text features the clinical perspective of Dr. Jordan Emont, a specialist in menopause, who delivers a really stark warning about the sheer biological devastation caused by the precipitous drop in estrogen.
Because estrogen is not just a reproductive hormone, it is a profound systemic protector. There are estrogen receptors in almost every tissue in the human body.
I had no idea.
Crucially, estrogen drives the production of endothelial nitric oxide, which keeps your blood vessels pliable and healthy. It also directly stimulates osteoblastic activity, the cells responsible for synthesizing new bone matrix.
Okay, so when estrogen drops.
When estrogen levels crash during menopause, that vital signaling just stops. The blood vessels stiffen, and the skeletal demolition crews suddenly vastly outnumber the construction crews.
Which is exactly why Dr. Iman is such a staunch advocate for bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, specifically utilizing a combination of transdermal estradiol alongside progesterone and testosterone.
Yes.
The text explores long-term clinical data showing that transdermal estradiol, because it bypasses the first-pass liver metabolism associated with older synthetic oral estrogens and therefore avoids the clotting risks, drastically reduces the incidence of osteoporosis, systemic cardiovascular disease, and even dementia.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, optimizing this chemical messaging isn't just about maintaining an active lifestyle, it is quite literally a matter of survival.
How so?
In the elderly population, suffering an osteoporotic fracture carries a staggering 50% mortality and loss of independence rate. When the structural scaffolding fails, the entire biological system quickly follows.
There is a genuinely heartbreaking case study shared by Dr. Emont about a 32-year-old woman who developed premature ovarian insufficiency, or POI. Her ovaries simply stopped producing estrogen. She went 7 full years without a menstrual cycle, and tragically, her medical team never offered her hormone replacement therapy.
That is just awful.
By forcing a woman in her early 30s to navigate an estrogen-depleted state for nearly a decade, she was subjected to, and more specifically, we need to look at hacking the deepest phases of sleep. The protocol here utilizes something called phase-locked pink noise. Now, my immediate thought when reading this was, I already have a loud white noise machine sitting on my nightstand to block out the garbage trucks in the morning. Am I not already doing this?
According to the clinical neuroscience conducted by Dr. Matthew Walker, absolutely not.
No.
Flooding your bedroom with a continuous static wall of loud sound all night is not optimizing your sleep architecture. In fact, it's a blunt instrument. What the advanced research points to is closed-loop acoustic neuromodulation.
Closed loop.
Right. This involves sophisticated biotracking devices that detect exactly when your brain enters a deep sleep slow wave. Precisely at the peak of that brainwave, the device delivers a short, 50-millisecond pulse of pink noise.
But how does a microburst of sound physically alter a brainwave?
Well, it taps directly into our evolutionary biology. The human auditory cortex never actually shuts off. It evolved to continuously monitor our environment for predator threats, even while we are completely unconscious.
That makes sense.
Because the brain is still actively processing sound, delivering that specific acoustic pulse in exact synchrony with the natural firing of your brain acts like a rhythmic musical clap that perfectly matches the brain's tempo. It drives the slow wave deeper, physically increasing the amplitude and the restorative power of that deep sleep stage.
They demonstrated this in a study involving older adults, ages 60 to 84. When researchers applied these synchronized pink noise pulses during deep sleep, they recorded a massive amplification in slow-wave brain activity, and the functional result was undeniable. The very next morning, those participants demonstrated a highly significant improvement in their ability to recall complex word pair associations.
The enhancement of memory consolidation during this phase is truly remarkable.
It's beyond remarkable. The specificity is almost unbelievable. There was an experiment detailed in the text where researchers had participants sit at a screen and memorize the physical locations of various objects. Each object was paired with a highly specific sound, for example. When they clicked on a picture of a cat, it played a meowing sound. Later that night, while the participants were locked into deep, slow-wave sleep, the researchers quietly played those exact sounds like the meowing cat back into the room.
Wow.
Right. When the participants woke up, their recall accuracy for the locations of those specific objects had skyrocketed. The targeted acoustic trigger directly commanded the brain to permanently hardwire that specific neural pathway.
Exactly. By maximizing the amplitude of those deep sleep stages, you are forcing the brain to aggressively clear out metabolic plaques, consolidate motor skills, and stave off cognitive decline. It transforms sleep from a passive state of rest into a highly aggressive, targeted repair protocol.
Okay, we have systematically rebuilt this entire machine. We've cleaned out the gut lining and recycled our old mitochondria. We've managed our nervous system stress loops and reinforced our skeletal scaffolding with hormones. We've even learned how to consolidate all of our repairs using acoustic neuromodulation during deep sleep. The machine is fully restored and bulletproof. So how do we build a massive high-performance engine to drop into it? We move to aerobic capacity.
Specifically, we move to the absolute ceiling of human cardiovascular output, maximizing your VO2 max through the 4x4 protocol.
So what does this all mean? When the average person thinks about longevity and extending their lifespan, the mental image is usually someone in their 80s taking a long, gentle, leisurely stroll through a park. Why is a text dedicated to longevity demanding that we perform absolute Olympic-level sprint intervals?
Because the gentle stroll is insufficient to force biological adaptation. VO2 max, which measures the maximum volume of oxygen your body can transport and utilize during severe exertion, is statistically one of the single most powerful predictors of long-term human survival. To raise that ceiling, you must push your cardiovascular system to its absolute functional limit. This sheer demand for oxygen forces your heart to increase its stroke volume and forces your muscle tissues to drastically increase their mitochondrial density. For context, an elite world-class VO2 max score sits above 80 milliliters per kilogram per minute.
To achieve that kind of physiological remodeling without destroying your joints with endless marathon training, the text outlines a protocol used by Sami Inkinen, a world champion endurance athlete. It's incredibly precise.
All right.
You execute an all-out maximum capacity effort sprinting, aggressive rowing, heavy cycling for 2 to 4 minutes. You follow that immediately with 3 minutes of active moving recovery. You repeat that cycle 4 to 5 times. That's it.
That's the whole workout.
And crucially, to avoid central nervous system burnout, you only perform this specific protocol twice a week in a focused 3-week block.
It is the ultimate expression of minimum effective dose for a maximum physiological yield. Inkinen actually utilized this highly concentrated protocol while preparing for a world championship triathlon. He completely abandoned the traditional method of logging endless, joint-pounding junk miles. By relying almost exclusively on these short, sub-35-minute VO2 max interval sessions, combined with plyometric power training, he dropped his overall running times by an astonishing 10% in just 4 weeks.
Which is an absolute physiological anomaly, considering the text points out that a 5% performance improvement over an entire year is generally considered a massive success for an elite athlete.
Exactly.
He drastically expanded his raw cardiovascular engine, and he did it without accumulating systemic wear and tear.
And for the individual focused on longevity, pushing that VO2 max ceiling as high as biologically possible today ensures that decades from now, you will still possess the sheer aerobic reserve required to maintain your physical independence and aggressively ward off cardiovascular disease.
It truly is a masterclass in building a biologically resilient machine. We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We started at the cellular level, exploring how the Autoimmune Protocol extinguishes gut inflammation and how Urolithin A actively recycles our degraded mitochondria. We took control of the nervous system's emergency brake via the physiologic sigh, and we protected our DNA telomeres by rooting ourselves in ikigai.
Yes, we did.
We learned how to proactively monitor our skeletal integrity with real-time CTX blood markers, and why hormone replacement therapy is a non-negotiable shield for structural health. We discovered how phase-locked pink noise can literally hardwire our memories overnight. And finally, we learned how to forge an elite cardiovascular engine using the 4x4 VO2 max protocol.
It is a profoundly empowering synthesis of human biology. But, looking back at all of these mechanisms, particularly the neuroscience of deep sleep, it raises a deeply compelling question that isn't explicitly addressed in the source text, but one we absolutely must consider. We just established that a simple, quiet sound, like a meowing cat played during slow-wave sleep, can permanently hardwire a specific memory into your physical brain architecture. If our auditory system is that remarkably sensitive during our deepest phase of unconscious consolidation, what is the biological cost of falling asleep while the television is blasting stressful negative news cycles? Are we inadvertently using our brain's most powerful neuroplastic repair phase to permanently hardwire our own baseline anxiety?
Wow. That is a heavy, incredibly provocative thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of human resilience. Our challenge to you this week is simple, but highly specific. Take exactly one protocol from the data we unpacked today. Implement the 4-second nasal breathing, schedule a blood test for your bone markers, or try a 4x4 sprint interval. Take one concrete step to upgrade your machine. We will see you next time.